The year was 1904. Far from the crowded streets of New York City and the growing factories of Chicago, the hills of Vermont welcomed another quiet spring morning. The mountains stood exactly where they had stood for thousands of years. The forests stretched across the valleys like an endless sea of green. Small rivers flowed gently between villages. Wooden bridges crossed peaceful streams. Church bells echoed across open fields. Life moved slowly here, very slowly. People measured time by the changing seasons rather than by the clock. Spring meant planting. Summer meant building. Autumn meant harvesting. Winter meant repairing, planning, and waiting patiently for warmer days to return. In the small town of Maple Hollow lived a carpenter named Benjamin Hale. Benjamin was 48 years old. He had spent nearly 30 years working with wood. Every morning, before the first rays of sunlight reached the valley, he woke without needing an alarm. His body simply knew. Years of routine had become stronger than any clock. On this particular morning, the sky outside remained dark. Only a faint silver glow appeared beyond the distant mountains. Benjamin opened his bedroom window. Cool mountain air drifted inside. It carried the scent of pine trees, fresh earth, and damp grass covered with morning dew. He breathed deeply. Many visitors described Vermont as beautiful. Benjamin rarely used that word. To him, this landscape was simply home, something familiar, something dependable. He dressed quietly, a plain cotton shirt, heavy work trousers, suspenders, a worn leather belt that had held his carpenter's tools for many years. His boots rested beside the bed. The leather had softened with age. Every scratch told part of a story. After washing his face in cool well water, Benjamin walked downstairs. The house remained silent. A kettle waited on the stove. Soon fresh coffee filled the kitchen with its rich aroma. Breakfast was simple. Warm bread baked the previous afternoon, fresh butter from a neighboring farm, a little apple jam prepared during the autumn. Nothing expensive, nothing unnecessary.
Like many craftsmen of his generation, Benjamin believed good work required simple habits. He finished eating just as the first sunlight touched the tops of the maple trees. Outside, birds had already begun singing. Their songs echoed through the valley. One after another, different voices joining together in the peaceful orchestra of morning. Benjamin stepped onto the front porch. His workshop stood only a short walk from the house. Built entirely from local timber, the small building had served him faithfully for nearly 20 years. Its walls carried the scent of fresh-cut pine and oak. Its windows glowed softly in the early light. He smiled. Every carpenter deserved a workshop that felt welcoming. Benjamin crossed the yard slowly. The grass sparkled with dew. Tiny drops reflected the morning sunlight like scattered pieces of glass. A gentle breeze moved through the maple trees. Leaves whispered quietly overhead. He unlocked the workshop door. The familiar smell greeted him immediately. Fresh wood, linseed oil, beeswax, sawdust, leather, iron. Every workshop possessed its own scent. Benjamin believed he could identify a carpenter simply by walking into his shop. Inside, every tool rested exactly where it belonged. Nothing lay scattered across benches. Nothing remained unfinished from the previous day. Order saved time. Order protected expensive tools. Most importantly, order showed respect for the craft. Along one wall hung handsaws of different sizes. Nearby rested wooden planes polished smooth by decades of use. Chisels lined a wooden rack, each sharpened carefully, each ready for work. Wooden mallets sat beside measuring squares. A brace and bit waited on another shelf. Benjamin ran his fingers lightly across the handle of his favorite smoothing plane. His father had given it to him many years earlier. The handle showed signs of countless hours of work. Its surface had become smooth through use. Many modern machines were beginning to appear in larger cities. Steam-powered sawmills, mechanical equipment, factory production. Yet in small Vermont towns, hand tools still ruled the workshop. Benjamin preferred them. They required patience, skill, care. A machine could cut wood quickly. A craftsman understood the wood. That difference mattered. Today's project involved building a large dining table for the Thompson family. They had recently completed a new farmhouse several miles outside town. Now they needed furniture, strong furniture, furniture built to last generations. Benjamin selected several carefully seasoned maple boards stacked against the back wall. The wood had dried naturally for nearly 3 years. Good wood demanded patience long before construction even began. He examined every board, looking closely at the grain, searching for knots, feeling its weight. No two pieces of wood were exactly alike. Every tree grew differently. Every board carried its own character. Benjamin believed wood should never be forced. Instead, the carpenter learned how each piece wished to be used. Some boards became table legs, others became wide tabletops. Still others were better suited for chairs or cabinets.
Nature often made the decision. The carpenter simply listened. Morning sunlight gradually filled the workshop. Golden beams entered through dusty windows. Tiny particles of sawdust floated gently through the air. Benjamin measured the first board carefully, twice, then once again. His father had taught him an old saying, "Measure twice, cut once." Benjamin had improved the saying over the years. Measure 3 times, then think about it one more time. A mistake with wood could rarely be undone. Care prevented waste. He marked the board with a pencil, lifted the handsaw, and began cutting. The sound echoed softly through the workshop, slow, steady, rhythmic, back and forth, back and forth. The blade moved smoothly through the maple. Benjamin never rushed. There was no prize for finishing first, only satisfaction in finishing well. Outside, the town slowly awakened. Horse-drawn wagons rolled along dirt roads. Farmers began their chores. Children prepared for school. Smoke rose from chimneys throughout Maple Hollow. Another ordinary day had begun. Inside the workshop, Benjamin continued working. Each completed cut brought the table one step closer to existence. Wood shavings curled gracefully beneath his plane. Thin ribbons of pale maple collected on the floor. The scent of fresh-cut wood became stronger. Many visitors found workshops noisy. Benjamin found them peaceful. Every sound carried purpose. The whisper of a plane, the tap of a mallet, the scrape of sandpaper, the quiet rhythm of careful craftsmanship. Near mid-morning, someone knocked gently upon the open workshop door. Benjamin looked up. Standing outside was 11-year-old Samuel Carter, the blacksmith's son. Samuel often visited after finishing his school lessons. He admired woodworking, perhaps even dreamed of becoming a carpenter someday. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." "Good morning, Samuel." The boy stepped carefully inside. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Benjamin smiled.
A workshop always has room for one more pair of eyes. Samuel walked slowly around the room. As always, he examined every tool with fascination. Children often notice details adults ignored. "This table looks important." Benjamin nodded. "It will probably feed one family for many years." Samuel considered that. "I never thought about furniture that way." Benjamin placed another board upon the workbench. Most people don't. The boy watched quietly as Benjamin adjusted the plane. "How do you know where to cut?" Benjamin held up the piece of maple. "The wood tells me." Samuel frowned slightly. "Wood talks?" Benjamin laughed softly. "Not with words." He pointed toward the grain. "Every line shows how the tree grew. If you pay attention, the tree still teaches you." Samuel studied the board carefully, perhaps trying to hear what Benjamin meant. Outside, church bells rang 11 times. The sound drifted gently through the open windows. Neither carpenter nor apprentice spoke for several moments. Sometimes silence explained more than conversation. Benjamin handed the boy a small piece of maple. "Feel it." Samuel ran his fingers across the smooth surface. "It feels warm." Benjamin nodded. Wood never completely forgets that it was once alive. The boy smiled. "I like that." Benjamin returned to work. Samuel watched every movement, every measurement, every careful cut, learning without realizing he was learning. Around noon, sunlight filled nearly every corner of the workshop. The fresh maple boards had begun taking shape. The tabletop slowly emerged from ordinary lumber. Not yet finished, not yet assembled, but no longer simply boards. That transformation fascinated Benjamin. Every project began with rough timber. Slowly, patiently, piece by piece, something useful appeared. A table, a chair, a bookshelf, a cradle. Objects meant not merely to exist, but to serve families, to witness birthdays, holiday meals, quiet conversations, children growing older. Benjamin believed furniture carried memories. A dining table remembered every meal. A rocking chair remembered every lullaby. A front door remembered every welcome home. Perhaps that explained why he loved his profession. He was not simply building objects. He was quietly helping shape other people's lives. Outside, the church bell rang once more. The afternoon waited patiently beyond the workshop door. And inside, surrounded by the scent of maple and pine, Benjamin Hale continued doing what he had loved for nearly 30 decades, one careful cut at a time. The afternoon sunlight drifted gently across the windows of Benjamin Hale's workshop. Outside, the hills of Vermont rested beneath a clear blue sky. A light breeze stirred the maple leaves. Birdsong echoed from the nearby forest. The day remained calm, exactly the kind of day Benjamin appreciated most. Inside the workshop, the scent of freshly cut maple filled the air. Wood shavings covered the floor like pale ribbons. The unfinished dining table rested upon sturdy wooden sawhorses. Its shape had begun to emerge, not yet complete, but already promising years of faithful service. Benjamin placed another board onto the workbench. Before touching a single tool, he paused. He studied the wood carefully. Years of experience had taught him that every board deserved attention before it deserved a cut. The grain flowed in gentle curves. Tiny growth rings revealed seasons long past. Some years the tree had grown quickly, other years more slowly. Every line told part of its history. Benjamin often wondered how old the maple tree had been. Perhaps 60 years, perhaps 80.
It had stood through countless Vermont winters, spring rains, summer sunshine, autumn winds. Now, in another form, it would continue serving people, not as a tree, but as a table around which a family would gather. There was something comforting about that thought. Nothing in nature was truly wasted. Everything simply changed. Benjamin reached for his smoothing plane. With steady hands, he guided it along the board. Long, graceful curls of maple rolled away from the blade. The surface became smoother with each pass. The sound filled the workshop, soft, rhythmic, almost musical. Outside, horse hooves echoed along the dirt road. A wagon approached slowly. Benjamin glanced through the window. It belonged to Abigail Thompson, the woman whose family had commissioned the table. She stopped beside the workshop and climbed down carefully, carrying a small basket covered with cloth. Benjamin stepped outside to greet her. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson." She smiled warmly. "I thought you might enjoy a little lunch." Benjamin looked surprised. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She handed him the basket. "But my husband says no one should build a dining table on an empty stomach." Benjamin laughed. "Your husband is a wise man." Inside the basket rested fresh bread, cheese made on a neighboring farm, slices of smoked ham, and 2 warm apple turnovers. Everything homemade, everything simple. Benjamin thanked her sincerely. Mrs. Thompson stepped inside the workshop. Her eyes immediately found the unfinished table. "It's beautiful already." Benjamin shook his head. "Not yet." She smiled. "You always say that." A carpenter never calls something beautiful until the last coat of finish has dried. Mrs. Thompson walked slowly around the project, running her fingers gently above the wood without touching it.
"My children will eat at this table." Benjamin nodded. "So will their children someday if I do my work properly." She looked at him thoughtfully. "I believe they will." For a few moments, neither spoke. Sunlight poured through the workshop windows. Dust floated gently through the warm afternoon air. The quiet felt comfortable. Finally, Mrs. Thompson prepared to leave. "We'll see you Sunday at church." "I wouldn't miss it." After she departed, Benjamin sat outside beneath a large maple tree to eat his lunch. The valley stretched peacefully before him. Fields of green rolled gently toward distant mountains. White farmhouses stood scattered across the countryside. Their red barns glowed beneath the afternoon sun. Several cows grazed quietly behind wooden fences. Everything appeared unhurried. Life in Vermont rarely rushed. Benjamin appreciated that. He believed careful work required a peaceful mind. After lunch, he returned to the workshop. The afternoon would be devoted to one of the most important parts of furniture making, joinery. Unlike factory furniture assembled with nails alone, Benjamin preferred traditional joinery, mortise and tenon, dovetails, wooden pegs, methods that had served craftsmen for centuries. Strong, reliable, beautiful in their simplicity. He carefully marked each joint using a small marking gauge. Every line required precision. A mistake of only a fraction of an inch could affect the entire table. Benjamin reached for one of his sharpest chisels. The polished steel reflected sunlight from the nearby window. Slowly, he began removing thin slices of wood. Tap, tap, tap. The wooden mallet struck the chisel with quiet confidence. Each movement deliberate, each cut controlled. The workshop filled once again with its familiar rhythm. No loud machinery, no engines, only the sounds of human hands working with natural materials. As the afternoon passed, another visitor appeared. Old Elijah Brooks, the town's retired schoolteacher. He visited the workshop nearly every Thursday,
never to order furniture, only to talk. Elijah believed workshops contained the best conversations. Benjamin welcomed him inside. The elderly teacher removed his hat and admired the growing table. "You're giving that maple tree another lifetime." Benjamin smiled. "I hope so." Elijah settled into an old wooden chair near the window. For several minutes, he simply watched. The carpenter worked. The teacher observed. Neither felt compelled to speak. Silence never embarrassed old friends. Eventually, Elijah broke it. "Do you remember the old meeting house?" Benjamin nodded immediately. "The one that burned 20 years ago? You helped build the new one." "I did." Elijah looked toward the church steeple visible beyond the trees. "I still remember the smell of fresh pine inside." Benjamin smiled softly. "So do I. Children still sit on the benches you built."
The carpenter paused. He had not thought about those benches in years. "It pleases me to hear that." Elijah nodded. "A teacher hopes students remember lessons." He looked around the workshop. "A carpenter hopes furniture lasts." Benjamin considered those words carefully. Perhaps every profession left something behind. Teachers left knowledge, farmers left harvests, blacksmiths left tools, carpenters left homes filled with useful things. The conversation drifted naturally from one subject to another: weather, harvest prospects, the arrival of spring birds, the condition of local roads. Nothing dramatic, simply the ordinary conversations that stitched small communities together. Late in the afternoon, sunlight turned warmer. Golden rays entered the workshop at a lower angle. Benjamin examined the table frame. The joints fit together perfectly. No gaps, no uneven edges, exactly as he had hoped. He gently assembled the frame without glue, only to test the fit. The table stood proudly in the center of the workshop, still unfinished, but already strong. Elijah smiled. "I believe that table could outlive both of us." Benjamin laughed quietly. "I certainly hope it does." The retired teacher stood slowly, time to return home. At the door, he paused. "You know, Benjamin." "Yes?" "Teachers think you're building furniture." Benjamin looked puzzled. "I suppose I am." Elijah smiled. "No." He looked back toward the unfinished table. "You're building family memories." The old teacher placed his hat upon his head and walked down the path toward town. Benjamin remained standing in the doorway, watching him disappear among the maple trees. The words stayed with him. Family memories. Perhaps that was true. A dining table would witness countless conversations, birthday celebrations, Sunday dinners, quiet breakfasts, children completing schoolwork, parents sharing stories, grandparents offering advice. Furniture became part of family history without ever speaking a single word. As evening approached, Benjamin cleaned his tools. Every blade returned to its proper place. Every bench brushed free of sawdust. The workshop slowly regained its familiar order. Outside, the Vermont hills glowed beneath the setting sun. Golden light stretched across the valley. Birds returned to their nests. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of pine once again. Benjamin closed the workshop doors. Tomorrow, the table would continue taking shape. One careful cut, one careful joint, one careful day at a time. And somewhere within every piece of maple, the quiet forests of Vermont would continue living for generations to come.
The next morning arrived quietly over the green mountains of Vermont. Before the first rays of sunlight reached the valley, a thin layer of mist rested above the nearby fields. The forests stood perfectly still. Only the gentle singing of robins and chickadees broke the silence. Benjamin Hale opened the workshop door just as he had done thousands of mornings before. The familiar scent welcomed him once again. Fresh maple, pine, linseed oil, beeswax, and the faint aroma of sawdust that had settled overnight. Some people believed happiness came from traveling to distant places. Benjamin believed happiness could be found by opening the same workshop door every morning. Routine never bored him. It comforted him. He lit a small oil lamp, although the room would soon be bright enough without it. The unfinished dining table stood patiently in the center of the workshop, waiting. Good furniture was never rushed. Benjamin often said that wood had already spent decades growing. It deserved a few extra days in the workshop. He ran his hand across the tabletop. The surface still needed careful sanding, not because anyone would notice tiny imperfections immediately, but because someone might notice them 20 years later. Quality meant thinking about people you would never meet, the children who would someday inherit the table, the grandchildren who would place their own hands upon its smooth surface. The thought made Benjamin smile. He selected several sheets of fine sandpaper. Slowly, gently, he moved it across the maple, back and forth, back and forth. Each movement removed only the smallest amount of wood. The workshop filled with a soft scratching sound, peaceful, steady, almost like the sound of wind moving through autumn leaves. Outside, sunlight slowly entered the valley. Golden light spilled across the hills. The distant church steeple reflected the morning sun. Farmers began leading horses into the fields. Smoke rose from chimneys throughout Maple Hollow. Another ordinary day had begun. Around mid-morning, Benjamin heard wheels approaching outside. A wagon stopped beside the workshop. This time it belonged to Nathan Collins, the owner of the local sawmill. Nathan climbed down, carrying a ledger beneath one arm. "Morning, Ben." "Good morning, Nathan. I brought those cherry boards you asked for." Benjamin walked toward the wagon. Several beautiful cherry planks rested neatly in the back. Their deep reddish color glowed warmly beneath the sunlight. Benjamin examined each one carefully. Straight grain, no large knots, perfectly seasoned. "You chose well," Nathan smiled. "I knew you would look at every board. I always do." Together, they unloaded the lumber. Each board was carried carefully into the workshop. Wood deserved respect long before it became furniture. Nathan remained for a few minutes watching Benjamin organize the new lumber. "You know," he said, "people in Burlington are buying factory-made furniture now." Benjamin nodded. "I've heard. They say it's faster." "It is. And cheaper." Benjamin smiled quietly. "It usually is."
Nathan leaned against the workshop door. "Does it worry you?" Benjamin looked toward the unfinished table. "No." Nathan seemed surprised. "Why not?" Benjamin picked up one of his hand planes. "This plane belonged to my father." He turned it gently in his hands. "And one day it may belong to someone else." Nathan nodded. Benjamin continued. "Machines can make furniture. They cannot make craftsmanship." For a moment, the two men stood silently. The sounds of birds drifted in through the open windows. Finally, Nathan smiled. "I suppose that's why people keep coming to you." After he departed, Benjamin returned to the table. The legs now needed their final shaping. Each one had already been cut. Now they required careful refinement. Using a spoke shave, Benjamin slowly rounded the edges. Thin curls of maple fell onto the floor. The wood seemed almost alive beneath his hands. Every curve became softer, more graceful. By late morning, the table looked completely different from when he had begun. Still unfinished, yet elegant. Strong without appearing heavy. Beautiful without unnecessary decoration.
Benjamin believed simplicity never went out of style. Around noon, children passed the workshop on their way home from school. Several stopped near the open doorway. They had often done so over the years. Woodworking fascinated them. One little girl raised her hand politely. "Mr. Hale?" "Yes." "Can I ask something?" "Of course." "How long does it take to make one table?" Benjamin thought for a moment. "About 3 weeks." The children looked surprised. 3 weeks? Benjamin nodded. "It takes much longer to grow the tree." The children laughed. He smiled with them. Sometimes the simplest answers were also the truest. One boy pointed toward the growing pile of wood shavings. "What do you do with those?" Benjamin gathered a handful. "Some go to nearby farms." "For animals?" "Yes." "The rest help start fires during winter." The children seemed impressed. "So nothing is wasted?" Benjamin shook his head. "A carpenter should waste as little as possible." After thanking him, the children continued down the road. Their cheerful voices gradually disappeared into the distance. Benjamin watched them for a moment. Perhaps one of them would become a carpenter someday, or a farmer, or a teacher. Whatever path they chose, he hoped they would learn the value of doing careful work. The afternoon passed peacefully. Benjamin mixed a fresh batch of wood glue using traditional methods. Modern adhesives were becoming available, but he trusted what generations before him had trusted. Some things endured because they worked. He carefully assembled the table frame. Each joint fit perfectly.
The legs stood square, the rails aligned exactly as planned. Using long wooden clamps, he applied steady pressure. Not too much, not too little. Then he stepped back. Sometimes the wisest thing a craftsman could do was simply wait. Glue required time. There was no shortcut. While the frame rested, Benjamin sharpened his tools. Each chisel received careful attention upon the sharpening stone. Steel met stone with slow, deliberate movements. A sharp tool was safer than a dull one. It also respected the wood. Many young craftsmen believed strength mattered most. Benjamin believed sharpness mattered more. Late in the afternoon, Reverend Samuel Whitmore stopped by the workshop. The minister removed his hat and smiled warmly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Never." The Reverend walked around the newly assembled table. "It reminds me of Noah." Benjamin looked puzzled. "The ark?" The Reverend laughed softly. "No, the patience." Benjamin smiled. "I've never thought about it that way. The best things often require time." Benjamin nodded. "I've noticed." The two men sat outside beneath the maple tree, watching clouds drift slowly across the Vermont sky. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence felt peaceful. Eventually, the Reverend said, "You've built furniture for nearly every family in this town." Benjamin looked toward the valley. "I suppose I have." "And someday," the minister smiled, "your tables will remain after all of us are gone." Benjamin considered those words. He had never built furniture for recognition, only because he loved the work. Yet perhaps the Reverend was right. A well-built table might remain in the same family for a century, long after names were forgotten, long after voices had fallen silent. The furniture would continue serving quietly, exactly as it had been intended. Evening approached once again. Golden sunlight filtered through the maple trees. The workshop glowed warmly. Benjamin removed the clamps from the table. The joints held perfectly, solid, strong, ready for the next stage. He gently placed his hand upon the finished frame, not with pride, but with gratitude. Gratitude for good wood, good tools, good teachers,
and another peaceful day spent doing meaningful work. Outside, the hills of Vermont slowly faded into evening shadows. The church bell echoed across the valley. Families gathered for supper. Smoke curled gently from farmhouse chimneys. Another ordinary day had quietly become another beautiful memory. And inside the workshop, beneath the scent of maple and pine, the table waited patiently for its final touches.
The final week of spring arrived with clear skies over the green mountains. Morning sunlight spilled gently across the hills, painting the forests in countless shades of green. The streams that wound through the valleys reflected the pale blue sky. Birds flew from tree to tree. The scent of blooming wildflowers drifted across the fields. Another peaceful day had begun in Maple Hollow. Benjamin Hale unlocked the door to his workshop just after sunrise. The familiar creak of the old hinges greeted him like an old friend. Inside, the nearly completed dining table stood quietly in the center of the room. Only a few final tasks remained. The wood had been shaped. The joints had cured. Every surface had been carefully sanded. Now the table awaited its finish. Benjamin believed the final finish was more than protection. It revealed the beauty that had always been hidden inside the wood. He placed a small tin of linseed oil upon the workbench. Nearby rested soft cotton cloths. No brushes, no machines, only patient hands. He poured a little oil onto the cloth. Slowly, almost gently, he rubbed the finish into the maple. Immediately, the pale wood began to glow. Golden patterns emerged from the grain. Lines that had been nearly invisible suddenly came alive. Every growth ring told the story of long Vermont winters. Every swirl spoke of spring rains. Every knot whispered of storms the tree had survived. Benjamin smiled. This was his favorite moment, the moment when ordinary lumber became something beautiful. He worked carefully around every edge, every leg, every joint. The workshop remained silent except for the soft sound of cloth moving across wood. Outside, church bells echoed through the valley. The sound drifted gently through the open windows. Benjamin paused for a moment, listening. Some sounds never grew old. Church bells, wind through maple leaves, rain on a workshop roof, the call of robins at sunrise. These simple sounds had accompanied nearly every day of his working life. Around mid-morning, Samuel Carter arrived once again. The blacksmith's young son removed his cap politely. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." Benjamin smiled. "Come inside." Samuel immediately noticed the table. "It looks different." Benjamin nodded. "The wood is finally showing its true character." The boy stepped closer. The maple reflected the morning light beautifully. "It almost shines." Benjamin handed him a small piece of polished maple. "Feel the difference." Samuel ran his fingers across the surface. "It's smoother than glass." Benjamin laughed softly. "Not quite, but smooth enough for many family dinners." The boy looked thoughtfully at the tabletop. "Will people remember who built it?" Benjamin considered the question. "Perhaps. And if they don't?" Benjamin looked toward the workshop window. "That isn't why I build." Samuel remained silent. The answer seemed to surprise him. Benjamin continued quietly. A good table doesn't need to remind people who made it. It only needs to serve them well. The boy smiled. "I think I understand." Benjamin hoped he did.
Craftsmanship was never about recognition. It was about usefulness, reliability, quiet excellence. As noon approached, the Thompson family arrived with their wagon. Mr. Thompson climbed down first. His wife followed. Behind them came their 3 children. The youngest could hardly contain his excitement. Benjamin welcomed them warmly. Without saying a word, he stepped aside. The family entered the workshop. For several moments, no one spoke. Sunlight poured through the windows onto the finished table. The maple seemed almost alive beneath its warm finish. Mrs. Thompson placed a hand gently upon the tabletop. "It's beautiful." Mr. Thompson walked slowly around it, examining every joint, every leg, every smooth edge. Finally, he nodded. "This will outlast me." Benjamin smiled. That was the plan. The children circled the table with wide eyes. One little girl whispered, "Can we really eat at this every day?" Her mother laughed. "For many years." Benjamin and Mr. Thompson carefully loaded the table onto the wagon. Blankets protected every surface. Ropes secured it gently. No hurried movements. Furniture built with patience deserved to be moved with patience. The journey to the Thompson farm took nearly an hour. Rolling hills stretched in every direction. Stone walls divided green pastures. Sheep grazed quietly beneath apple trees. The countryside looked exactly as Benjamin remembered it from childhood. Some places change slowly. Vermont was one of them. At the farmhouse, neighbors had gathered to help. Together, they carried the table into the dining room. Sunlight entered through large windows. The room smelled of fresh pine boards. The table fit perfectly, as though it had always belonged there. Mrs. Thompson placed a simple vase of wildflowers in the center. Instantly, the room felt complete. The children chose their favorite seats. Mr. Thompson stood quietly beside the table. He looked at Benjamin. "My grandchildren will probably eat here someday." Benjamin nodded. "I hope they do." After sharing coffee and homemade pie, Benjamin prepared to leave. The family thanked him once more, but Benjamin felt that the table itself would continue saying thank you long after he was gone. As he drove home through the Vermont countryside, the afternoon sunlight stretched across the fields. Farmers worked quietly in distant pastures. Children played beside wooden fences. A horse grazed peacefully near a red barn. Everything seemed connected. The forests that provided timber, the sawmill that prepared the lumber, the workshop that shaped it, the family that would use it. Nothing existed alone. Every person contributed something to the community. Back at Benjamin's workshop, Benjamin swept the floor one final time. The maple shavings were gathered into neat piles.
Every tool returned to its place. The workbench stood empty once again, ready for another project. Perhaps a rocking chair, perhaps a bookcase, perhaps a cradle for a young family. There would always be something useful to build. As evening approached, Benjamin closed the workshop doors. He sat for a while beneath the old maple tree outside. The valley glowed beneath the setting sun. Golden light touched church steeples, farmhouses, stone walls, and forests stretching toward the distant mountains. The air remained perfectly still. He thought about all the furniture he had built over the years. Kitchen tables, dining tables, beds, bookshelves, rocking chairs, doors, windows, church pews, school desks. Most people would never think about the carpenter after those pieces were delivered, and Benjamin liked it that way. The best craftsmanship quietly became part of everyday life, useful, dependable, almost invisible. The furniture simply did its job, year after year, generation after generation. As darkness settled over Maple Hollow, stars slowly appeared above the green mountains. The workshop stood quietly beneath the night sky. Inside, empty workbenches waited patiently. Tomorrow, another board would be measured, another piece of maple would meet the plane, another project would begin. Not because Benjamin wished to become famous, not because he wished to become wealthy, but because he believed every carefully made object made the world a little better. One smooth tabletop, one strong chair, one well-fitted door, one honest day's work. And so, beneath the peaceful Vermont stars of 1904, another chapter quietly closed. The forests continued growing, the rivers continued flowing, families continued gathering around sturdy wooden tables. And somewhere, in homes across the valley, the quiet hands of one carpenter continued serving people who might never know his name, but who would feel the comfort of his work every single day.